Hello, everyone. I am Stephen Drew from the Architecture Social, and it's Friday night. It's Friday night, and I've got company with someone that's become someone from the architectural industry where I've, over the years, I've got to know on a level that we speak on the phone. We can have long chats like old friends and talk about the ways of the world, talk about the BIM industry, and talk about the architecture industry. I am lucky to be joined by my old compadre, Pierre Venter. Pierre, how are you today?
Stephen, I'm great. Can't complain. No, I am. I'm going to do the English thing. The weather's terrible.
Complain away. Coronavirus world.
I got to say, I woke up this morning. It was 4 degrees outside here. I'm in Kingston, and I was really mad. You know, you can see the jerseys on and everything.
Yes.
You know, coming from Africa, it's cold in England. I'm not talking about the people and the compassion. I'm just talking about the weather.
Yes, it is. It is. And of course, we're not gonna go into the intricacies of what's happening but it's important as human beings to acknowledge that now is quite a stressful time. You're inadvertently in this awful situation. We're all in architecture. We're all in the midst of coronavirus, and I'm not particularly interested in having a debate on Boris Johnson's ludicrous tier 3 system. Oops, sorry. Did I say too much? Did I say not enough? But what we talk about, it is completely stressful. So we have all that going on. But in terms of context, I think it's really important that why I'm laughing and why I'm comfortable is because we've inadvertently known each other for many years. We kind of like go in and out of conversations naturally because of where we are in time. But we met many moons ago, just when I was after being a part 2 architectural assistant. I trained up in BIM a little bit in the architectural practice. I used it a little bit, but this was 2014. This is where it was when Revit was the thing that people needed to conquer. This was on the agenda of any architectural practice in the UK in 2013, 2014. They kind of knew they had to get Revit on board, and they were going about it. And so at the time, I left being a part 2 architectural assistant, and I joined Bespoke Careers, which is a good recruitment company. It is a good recruitment company. And at the time, they sponsored an event called BIMnet. And me and you met, and we had many good conversations. And that's where I know of yourself, because we were there in person. Not in this digital world online. We were physically in Clerkenwell. We were talking about BIM, and that's where we met. So maybe if you rewind, Pierre, for everyone here, so maybe give a bit of your backstory in terms of architecture, then going into BIM, and then how about you came, how our paths crossed in London 2014. That would be an amazing intro.
Yeah. So, Stephen, an interesting one. I mean, I spent most of my life up until 2013 in South Africa, in Durban, on the East Coast. Played water polo for 17 years. Really enjoyed surfing, diving, swimming, sailing, all water sports. And then to put it in context, I arrive in the UK and I've never been in the Thames River, which is just down the road.
Me neither.
I've never gone for a swim. It's too bloody cold. I can't take it. No good coming here. But so I studied architecture at the University of Natal. At the time, it's now University of KwaZulu-Natal, part of the changes that have taken place in South Africa and the provinces, etc. Graduated in 1990 and entered into the fray. And one of the problems that we encountered was within my 2 years of registration, ended up with the firm closing down. We went into the first sort of economic recession in South Africa. And what do? You're a young graduate. You've just qualified. You've got this ability to put architect behind your name and say, I am an architect, but you've got nowhere to work. Now, there's some parallels to where we are now.
Oh, you tell you what, you couldn't get away with that in the UK, isn't it? I remember when I was in architectural practice and I was an architectural assistant, and you can't say you're an architect. So tell me, that's really interesting. I've got a friend who's actually the BIM manager at Adams and Associates, David Rose, and he's South African as well. But tell me, what kind of, in terms of maybe it goes slightly personal in this sense, but in terms of when did you come to the UK, and what made you decide that you wanted to kind of come to the weird and wonderful world of London? What brought you to that decision?
I was practicing on my own at that stage, small micro practice, doing consultation, teaching Revit, providing architectural services to one of the big Autodesk resellers in South Africa. And a friend of mine here in the UK said he had a job, spoke to an architect from an interior design practice who were doing some work, and said, well, I've got a friend in South Africa. Quickly to tell you was that there were 3 interviews on Skype, because, now we're going back in time where we still had Skype and that kind of thing. And the guy said, you've got the job.
Wow.
So it took 9 days. I basically sold the house, packed up the business.
Wow. That quick you sold the house?
Jumped on the plane. I promise you, I've never been so knackered in my life. I work 20 plus hours a day. You think as a student you work hard? Promise you, this was the hardest that I'd worked.
Well, I know you work hard. Yeah.
I've fell asleep on the plane, which I normally don't do. And they actually had to come and check that I was still alive. They put a mirror over my mouth. Anyway, I arrived 2 days later, started work in the city. And that was basically to come for 2 particular projects. And just the challenge was really good. And they wanted to implement Revit. And that was where my key focus was around BIM implementation and this new tool, Revit.
Well, you've always been passionate about it, and the thing is, even with me. So, in terms of the role of at the time, in terms of architectural BIM, I was hosting an event, and I was lucky that I actually worked in the industry and I worked on Revit. And what I really enjoyed, and the impression that I always retain in terms of yourself, is that you're very, very giving in terms of a believer of sharing information, because it's like everything else in life. You have some people, which, of course, we all work really hard, and in BIM, I think a lot of it is about collaboration. Yes, you can script something and keep it for yourself and hold that up. But actually, in terms of the BIM community, in terms of many communities, it's about giving back and contributing. And the point is, that's where I met you, physically in an event, openly talking about BIM, the ins and outs. And if you remember the time, my friend Chris Rosetto, who's a kind of a BIM manager, I love Chris. Chris, if you're listening, shout out to you. You are an absolute gentleman and completely awesome at what you do. But that's the point where I had used Revit for a little while. Chris Rosetto was amazing at what he does. And I remember he was engrossed into a conversation with you as well. And that was back in 2014. So what was the year you moved to London? Was it around that time that we met?
Yeah. I'd come in March 2013. So it was just prior to that. And there'd been some movements in where I was living in London. I mean, I've really been benefited by coming into London and being, I'll say, this side of the city, close to the river, get on my bicycle, head off out to Thames Ditton and out down to Surrey Hills. I cycle. I'm keen on doing a bit of cycling.
Great.
And so it was at that time, it was that dynamic. I mean, the one thing about Revit, BIM, all these things is that the changes that we're experiencing now are just phenomenal. The technologies. Quick one is that I've just taken a project I did in 2005, which was a proposal, and I'm going to publish it on my LinkedIn just for people to see. But it's something I think is important. Go back and have a look at a project that you did before. And to put that in context, to do a single rendering of really low resolution was 30 hours of work on a single image. Right. I've got a little bit of extra horsepower sitting in front of me right now. It's a little P53. Just rub the.
Oof.
But you now do a 4K or an 8K resolution render in under 2 minutes. And it's absolutely stunning. So the kind of dynamic that we're in is that this amazing capability, but the review process is so important, because what you thought was great actually was a pile of junk. But because you've now got these additional tools, you can actually start seeing where to go. We're getting information, and also information overload.
It's interesting. So to put it into context, because I love this topic, and let's go through that, because in terms of listeners who are listening to this, Pierre, we're going to get people that have used Revit for a long period of time, as well as people that are using it now, or maybe, for instance, students which are literally just learning Revit, they're entering it, and it's the status quo. But to kind of put it in comparison, so in terms of the UK, and this is my opinion, and let's see what you think as well. So AutoCAD and MicroStation was prevalent up until, I reckon, 2012. It was really big in 2000, but up until 2012, it was a really, really big thing. And then 2012, we started having the pressure in the UK business environment to start going to Revit. That doesn't mean that companies did it straight away. It was a slow transition, which in some cases is even happening today. And you can go into the debate about every company is still transitioning because it's to what level of BIM you use. But without any jargon or anything like that, what was the first year you used Revit?
2003, I bought my first package.
Right. So this is where we're going with this. So in 2003 was the first time you used Revit, and it was being introduced in the UK. So that's where I live, and that's where you know. And I think it's fairly accurate to say 2013 is when people were saying, right, we need to deal with this. 2015 is when people started panicking, but you know what I'm on about. It was not used in the UK at all. So this opportunity that your friend talked about came about in that recent period of time. Yeah. So for anyone that's been using Revit now compared to before, can you give us a little bit of a flavor of how it's changed over the years and what it was like to first use Revit?
Well, to put this in context as well, is that I detest AutoCAD. Right. So anybody out there, I'm an Autodesk user, use the whole suite, but I really dislike AutoCAD. And the reason behind that was I actually originally purchased a package called Genesis. And Genesis was one of the first parametric applications that I ever tried. At the same time, I'd just done a course on DrawBase. I was using an old mini mainframe system called RPlan.
Right.
Now, when we first started a couple of years prior to that at Varsity, to start up the PC took 15 minutes. It was an XT. It was this size, 5 floppies. And I mean, now we come along and we've got more power in this little device.
You're mobile.
People understand.
Yeah.
So from that really slow 2D, lots and lots of redlining, and starting to make the move. That was a Revit version 5.0. And I looked at it and said, I'm swapping because I could see immediately this ability to see things 3 dimensions, but also to be able to produce the 2D things that other people needed to see. That switch was for me mind-blowing. We've encountered lots of resistance because this is a change. And a common term you hear is, but we don't do it that way. And a parallel to this exactly is, what is the imperial measurement? I only work in metric until I deal with people from the rental and retail, and they want everything in square feet so they can market it. And that's the sort of quandary where we've been in our industry, is that we've got, on one side, America's still working with bloody feet and inches. Mind-blowing that somebody actually does that.
It's true. My brain always thinks in metric. I struggle with that as well, Pierre. I find that completely fascinating. And what I would say is that when I was a Part 2 architectural assistant, I remember being in an architectural office. And so EPR Architects is an amazing company. If anyone's listening there, really, really good. And they actually were ahead of the curve. And now, when I say ahead of the curve, the UK was still far behind in terms of Revit. Okay, so they were an early adopter. But what you know as well, Pierre, is that being an early adopter in terms of the UK didn't necessarily mean that you were an early adopter of BIM in terms of the world. And so just to give it a bit of context, during 2014, so you had people like yourself. You had Chris Roseos, Australian, South African. My friend David Rose, he's South African as well. You have yourself. You have many other people. And what was bizarre was that there was this kind of Australian BIM rush, or as I nickname it now. I never thought of it like before, but it was like that, where actually some amazing, talented architects who were just very good at BIM came to the UK and they became BIM managers, because during this period of time, no one knew what was going on. And you had this mad scenario where sometimes you could have a part two architectural assistant somewhere become very, very successful as a BIM manager, which would never normally happen in any other environment. But actually, during this world, they proved their worth. They were very, very good. And what I'm saying is, it was this crazy opportunity within this space to exceed or become pivotal roles where you wouldn't else before. But another thing that's probably important, and this is my opinion in terms of BIM, well, there's so many success stories where I'm on about. There's so many different stories with BIM where you have a lot of people that have good BIM consultancies. I know the stuff that you do is really, really well. And you also have some people that are in for it for a quick buck. And what I'm on about is that people that, like yourself, unlike yourself, haven't, let me rephrase that, worked on it since 1994. Unlike yourself, do not understand the BIM process. You understand the BIM theory. You've been there and you've had really nice chats with me about, because BIM is a methodology. That's my understanding. Revit's a tool. And the point is, you need to understand the brief, the agenda, what you're doing. It's not just about how you rule the software. And I think that from my outsider view is that there was a period where, in quote unquote, I call it the BIM bubble, where certain people could do very well for a certain short period of time, but actually when the acid test came to it, when they were down to the line and when they had to steer a project, it was incredibly difficult. But as you know as well, from, in my opinion, you're someone I respect in terms of BIM. You're someone that we've talked over the years. It's the UK's definition of BIM, where it's at, has completely changed. So you came in 2013, 2014. How was it like then? Maybe you start there. Maybe we can talk about how it's like now, how things have changed.
Right. So I think that fundamentally one of our biggest problems is that we thought that software was the solution.
Right.
And recently I did a talk for a organization called Exceptional BIM in South Africa, and they're a training and development group. But what it is that for me as an architect, fundamentally, that's probably the most important part of BIM, is in fact the pen.
Right.
Because I'm still somebody who, and I did show you this a little bit earlier, but it was pieces of paper which is not very eco-sensitive and all the rest of it. But it gives me a great sense of relationship. But one of the key things is that if we don't have the fundamental knowledge right, we're not going to do well in BIM. The other part is that BIM is about people, firstly. And when you put a team together, you get the best results. And the analogy is a rugby team. You have the big guy who's the prop, because not everybody can be big and in the front as the prop.
That was my role when I was in WordPay. Yeah, I wasn't good for much, but the prop.
Yeah, no, I was a center and a wing, so I was the sprinter out in the outside. But having a team taking these technology enablers, and that's the part that BIM is about. And when we started, I'll be the first to admit that I used Revit as a drafting tool.
Right.
Because basically that deliverable of putting out a drawing was the only result. Not using, and the tools just didn't have it. I told you about the 30 hours to render something. We didn't have the same capacity that the hardware now gives us. I do think that part of the enabling those young people, and I've worked with a couple of people that during my time in the UK, and the younger people coming out who could grasp the technology became, in a way, the technology enabler in a practice.
Great, yeah.
The old guys like me, Gray and what have you, who had a resistance to the change, saw the person as providing that skill, which got things out the door. And that's it. We need to get production. But the whole part about the early start of BIM was how to get a series of documents out that would put your design forward. Because that's ultimately what architecture is about, is creating those spaces. So it's a funny boat. It's almost like surfing. If you put too much weight on the front foot, you go tearing down the wave. It's almost like I did snowboarding at the the Snow Dome in Milton Keynes. Fell off, I don't know, can't tell you how many times, and I thought I was a good surfer. So anyway, so the BIM process, ultimately, that is something that, as we've moved currently, I'm really happy to be this side of the pond, not back in South Africa right now, because of the way that the UK and the people involved in the UK BIM Alliance, Centre for Digital Built Britain, etc., all those people are contributing to a leading place in the world. You know, if we weren't there, we wouldn't have the ISO standard being pushed like it is now. So it's a great part to be, because of the enabling that we're getting with putting things together.
I think that's a really good kind of introduction to it. And that's the kind of bit that what I didn't learn so much is, so when I was at part 2, when it was 2013, 2014, I was quite keen to learn Revit because I felt like it was the way to go. And I assimilated my assumption of Revit based upon what I thought it was. I could kind of see from being a video gamer, like a bit of a geek, that is the way to go. And the concepts that you talk about now in terms of teams, collaboration, and people, it kind of felt like the norm, because I was someone that would play World of Warcraft online, and to kill the boss, you needed 60 people all talking to each other. You needed the mages, you needed this, you needed that, and you needed the priest to heal you. And therefore, if you didn't do it, you couldn't do the task. Right. And so these concepts, I realize now, subliminally was in me, that I'm like, well, yeah, of course, Revit makes much more sense. But I think that it's taken practices a lot of time to realize that, but also partly not due to their own fault, as in, and now I'm sure you can go into many examples where you'd say, look, any project is better off in BIM, and I would agree with you. At the start, though, there was definitely what I saw is, so when I moved away from working in architecture, so EPO was always trying to push towards BIM. They were always trying to do it the right way. And you know, it's probably like the first few BIM models you're going to get in the office. It's like, let's be realistic. It's like everything else. There's going to be mistakes that people learn on those projects, which are going to inform how to do a better BIM model. And maybe they're not quite BIM level 1, BIM level 2, they're like BIM level 0.5, but you needed to do them to get where you wanted to go. And there's no shame in that. I always find it mad how people can be worried about it, but you get what I mean, Pierre. It's you have to learn, you have to use BIM, and half of the things is like, you tell me this now, but what I think is that maybe you make certain mistakes in certain BIM models, which make it clunky, make it difficult, and then in the next one you go, do not do this scenario, because that is a world of pain and we're not going to do it again.
Now, it's an interesting one, because that project that I took and reviewed, it's the one area that I find in a large number of practices and people that I talk to is we just don't make that tangible stop and review what we've just done. And if we did that a couple of times during the project, and at the end of the project, it would have informed us along the way, and we would constantly improve the cycle. But we're normally in such a rush to get things done, we don't perform that action. And the review really starts to say, if you start building the team, and that's the thing about a team, is you don't just turn the light on and everybody's in a team. And the teams that we're talking about right now is not just in an architect's practice. It's engagement from the client right the way through to the contractor, to the handover, and then ultimately the end user, in-use person. That's that whole team. And it's a different approach. I think that we're starting to see the changes that's bringing.
Let's build upon that, because you're onto something which I find is really interesting, because I think when people associate BIM and Revit, they can maybe associate it with, in terms of how well you know the program, how long you know all the shortcuts, how much you know all that. And yes, that's really important. But in terms of what you just talked about there, for anyone, you talked about project management, you talked about reviews, you're talking about delivering a project alongside BIM. And in terms of BIM is an amazing tool. But what I quite like there, which you're fleshing out, is that actually BIM is not just, or in terms of this context, in terms of building a project, there's an awful lot of project management that is involved in it. It's an awful lot of people management. It's an awful lot of several users, several companies using a BIM model. And that's the strategic bit that you talked about, which I think can sometimes easily go amiss, because it's one thing to know the software, but from an outsider point of view, because I've not used it for many years, what it seems like to me, half of what a successful architecture practice is that they learn from examples of what did and didn't work, and they go, okay, for this project we need these people, we're going to do these reviews which you're talking about, and we're going to deliver it in BIM, we're going to use this software, and we're going to have a BIM manager, we're going to have a BIM coordinator to help them, and therefore it's set up. Have you found that over the years, that what's it like now then, Pierre, in terms of projects? Is it still very much that some projects, unfortunately, they do not get planned correctly at the start and inherit problems going on? Or do you think that people are slowly getting there, or is it a combination of both?
I think one of our first problems that we've made for ourselves as an industry is that we get a team together, architects, engineers, client, contractor. We do a great project with all the little niggles and the warts in between, come up with something that's finished, disassemble the team and reassemble a totally new team on another project, instead of taking that team and transplanting it and doing the next project. Now, I'm not saying that isn't part of the dynamic, but we do it all the time. And those companies that are engaged now with contractors, large tier ones, etc., that have followed through with the same team, are starting to experience the kind of benefits that by having the same people with a comfortable relationship in the team. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be tensions and all the rest of that, but that they engage, they get the benefit, because now everybody is conscious about somebody else. Because part of this team thing is all about mutual respect as well. And we agree to disagree. As long as you don't disagree with me, it's fine. But
yeah, right. Go on. I know you're super approachable, and you care about the company. But
I think that the real part about the way that we do anything is actually establishing, and that's exactly what happens in the ISO standard and the BS 1192, but now the ISO standard, is we formalize all the fundamental pieces. And there's a couple of tools out there that are starting to really enable us even further. And we're not talking about trade names and all the rest of it, but there are some of these that I got engaged. I had a 2-year period where I was doing some time in Saudi Arabia, and absolutely brilliant experience. But there was an application that came out called LOD Planner, which is now gone and it's changed its name. But at the time, that was absolutely brilliant. It started looking at planning. Right. And project management. Now, personally, I don't like project managers. Okay, but that's because I'm an architect, and originally as an architect, I did all those things myself. But I do understand there's definitely a place where project management is critical. However, with all of these things that BIM brings to us, what's the one problem that we do? Typically, unrealistic expectations. Because people don't know how long it takes to put out a drawing.
Right.
And it's not finite. Design takes time, but there's a couple of things that other industries have a much better set of benchmarks. And in practices, we need to do the same thing, in my opinion.
I hear you. So let's talk a little bit about what you've done with BIM Initiative. So you of course work with some many good companies, as well as in terms of BIM Initiative. You've done some really interesting stuff, and let's bring it to now, because you touched briefly upon the what's quite interesting is that now hardware has propelled. So Autodesk have been following the gaming industry, and we have, for instance, what you're talking about in terms of BIM. Okay, so we're not going to go into video game engines. We're not going to go into that. But where I find it really interesting is that I wrote a dissertation many years ago in terms of interactive virtual environments. And what I've noticed about in terms of BIM is that it's gone so far in terms of where you're on about. We're not talking about photorealism here, but not what we're talking about is high quality, very good looking images, which are produced on a very short and rapid period of time. And that's what I appreciated what you're saying is that what I'm amazed by right now is for Lumion and a few other things. But look, you're the guru in this way of actually that it's not so convoluted anymore, that you can actually set up in your architectural company, you can produce images for which you can get back quickly. So in terms of, we notice like in an architectural practice, yes, you're going to spend ages on your hero images and they can be rendered by that company, the one that's famous and paid a lot of money because the developer's going to use that and it's going to be amazing. But what you're on about is incredibly good company. Good. So say now this hero shot is 100% awesome, but it costs a few £1,000s. What you're on about is something that gets you 70% of the way, looks very good, looks very, very good. And that image is produced in 2 minutes because it's generated by the kind of technology which is used in 3D video game engines, right? Because there's an element of quick feedback. So surely, and sorry, I'm divulging in what I was passionate before, but how cool is that? Because you mentioned in terms of a design meeting, this kind of feel and quality of image would take normally hours to produce, and you can whack it out on the fly. And surely then that has a massive implication on you as a designer. You can change things quickly. You can see what they look like. But in terms of a design team meeting, the images that you showcased and we posted it in the Architecture Social. Yeah. Of course, you spent a bit of time in there. Of course, you set things up. You could whack them out on a fly for me again, though, in 2-3 minutes because you've worked out the process. So what's your thoughts currently on that then? That's a game changer, right?
So there's a philosophy behind this. One of the things about producing visuals is actually not that they're just pretty pictures, but for me, they're actually a quality control.
You're right.
So when I see the material, if I saw a bitumen asphalt wall, I know that somebody's put the wrong material in that position. I'm using a really extreme example. But what the visualization does for us, and I use this frequently, I'm a keen user of Enscape. And the idea behind that is that in Enscape, I can generate a panoramic view. Might take 3 minutes to generate it. But basically, you put it on the phone, and you take the phone and you walk around like this, and you can look at where you are in the building.
Right.
So I can send that to a client and say, I want your opinion. Do you like the wood or the metal? Would you like the ceiling like this? So we're talking about some modeling and what have you going in. But what it does is it gives a client or somebody the ability to visualize what they're doing without 5 sets of drawings on a device that you can handle. And I've had people actually walking around their office saying to people in the office, they were doing a development, they said, what do you think about this? And that opinion came back and immediately made a decision that eased the workflow.
Right, so got it.
That's the one side. The other side is that probably, and I think you'd probably recognize one of these things.
I reckon that, all right, so just for the audio listeners here, you pointed up the HTC Vive, a little bit of virtual, or what was that?
Oculus Quest.
Oculus Quest. VR, though.
Not the 2. I can't afford that one right
now. Okay, fair enough.
But exactly that. That device means you clip it on. It has the ability to be tethered or untethered. Yeah. It can come through on the wireless. And the nice part is you and I can go into the design without having to travel around. So the time that we save by not having to commute can now be converted into having a session. Now, something that you know from the gaming side is that these things are so bloody immersive. It just means that you get inside this thing and it's gone.
Yeah, you're right. You get such a feel for the space, and that could be, and sure, on where you're going with in terms of the design team, you could probably snag something straight away, like this is not right. So you're snagging.
So the kind of great thing is I'm busy learning how to use this particular application, and I bought a subscription for a package called Iris VR, which is one of those in the market right now. But what's really nice is that these things get loaded into the cloud. So right. I was busy practicing, and I was in the building on the 4th floor, and I clicked on the layers and turned the floors off. And I promise you, I've never had vertigo before. I looked down and I saw floors and furniture and things 4 floors down, and I almost found myself going, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, whoa, stop me falling.
That's it. It is that immersive. Plus the fact that you can change the time of day. You're gleaning all this extra information. And that part is incredibly powerful. So final part to this is that if we do the usual thing, every 2 weeks, we print a pack of paper, you go and have a meeting, you redline all these things, people take that away, update, have a week review, redo work that they've already done, which they've had to now unwind. You can imagine doing this where you have a meeting session, just 30 minutes with a team, and it makes it following the lean and sprint method is that you're getting this feedback cycle so much quicker.
Yes.
By going through and embracing people in this technology. Yeah. And it really is an enabler.
That's where I find really interesting, because there's other practical applications in terms of like a really nice shiny walkthrough in terms of a £2 million flat. If someone is a buyer in Dubai and you sell a flat in London, you can do that remotely. But what I love in terms of your scenario, which I think people maybe forget, or I didn't think of it at first. Was that you're on about the practical application in terms of the architectural process day by day. And what you're talking about is the way the conversation goes, that saying that me and you were in the room with the design team meeting and you say, here's what I think of the plan, this is what I've done, then actually by putting the Oculus Rift or putting the VR headset on, then it's another tool. And that's what we're on about. We're on about it's a tool for you to design that informs information, informs your decision. You're still making the decision in the physical sense. But what I quite like about what you're talking about is that, and if I put this headset on, I can go, well, look, Pierre, I was literally just in the space. I was literally there in the headphones, and I didn't like the way when I went into the space, maybe I think that the stairs, it was a bit too close. Or it could be that I was like, look, some pillars there, or I walked around a room and there were certain design decisions I would change. And you can go, Steve, look, don't worry about it. We're not on site. We're at early stages. I'm going to flip around it in the model. And I go, okay, cool. I get a coffee, we talk to another thing. And then throughout that design team meeting, you go, Steve, just let you know, you complained about the stairs because I know you're very difficult to work with. No, you wouldn't say that because you're a professional. You go, Steve, you're a very valuable client of mine. And what I've done is I've changed the staircase. What about it in this position? I put on the headset and I go, that's great. And so what you're talking about is that you've boiled it down from 2 design meetings to 1, because now the space of the technology, that is caught up in that meantime. And that's what I find really interesting, because I wrote that the thesis when I was in architecture in 2014, and Lumion, I think at the time, I believe was out, but it was very early, and Twin was there, and it was better but less accessible than Lumion, and that's what I wrote on and what I kind of saw from a 3D game environment. And I actually used CryEngine at the time. I did one of my architectural projects in the CryEngine, and people could walk around it. That's why I was so enthused. So it's really, I'm quite pleasantly surprised that our conversations organically talked about these tools in a literal sense. And that's why I want to draw from this is what I like is that we're on about design team meetings. We're on about stuff that every architect in here experiences. And the point is, it's not about being seduced by the technology. The technology should be there for you, right? It's like, we're not in Revit or Lumen just for the sake of it. You're on about that you want to provide someone with a design decision that they can make quickly.
Well, amongst other things, Stephen, what is the biggest problem about VR is that typically you've got no record of what you've done unless you record a video to show as you went around. So the technology now, the same speed of the graphics processor, is starting to enable us to include AI. And there's an application called Fireflies.ai, which is a voice-to-text transcript application service that's being provided. Now, can you imagine you go along, you've got your microphone on, and you say, Joe, change the door on D7. Now, how did you know it was D7? Well, this is the part that VR, so Twinmotion, that's one of the applications I'm using. Okay, Unreal Engine. I like Unity as its competitor. But what it's doing for you is it's actually bringing the BIM information into the screen. You can go and click on something and get the information related to it. So you're not just somewhere in space and dealing with something that is ethereal. It actually has a real value. And you can say to somebody, well, check element number 2500. But what it is that these things now are integrating the record of what you're doing, a log of what you're changing, and giving people the ability to go click and go to that place in the model. Wow.
Yeah, I agree. Let's say this. Wow, I agree. And so what's interesting, I latch on in this subject because I find it really fascinating, the stuff that you're talking about in terms of 3D game engines, using these tools to solve problems. And it's probably important to mention in terms of Revit and BIM, actually, there are so many different ways you can solve problems as well. So I have a friend called Thomas Mahone. He set up his own company called Bimorph, and he's very much in a different end, which kind of complements what we're talking about in terms of custom programming, making all this stuff. I've spoken many times to David Flynn and Mark, at Design Tech, which was from Grimshaw, and they've solved different complicated problems. And what I take away from this, and this might be a generalist viewpoint, and you tell me what you think as well, but whether it's a 3D game engine or whether it's writing a complicated script that in Python that you roll it into the practice. And actually, the interesting thing about Revit and the interesting thing about BIM, then let's go talk about BIM, is that with all this stuff that we're talking about, without talking about fancy jargon, it's solving problems. It's making decisions quicker. And that's what you're on about. And it's about doing it in a way that everyone can collaborate, everyone can make decisions together, everyone can share information, so that initially, yes, it's harder if you've never worked in BIM to set up all this stuff. The point is, though, the reason you're doing it is because the ideologies of it is the right way. It's built upon collaboration and sharing ideas. And what you're on about is that now technology is finally in a position to get there. And you have companies at the moment like Bimorph and David Flynn, this new company, I forget the name, but it's from Design Tech, I'll get that, and yourself and what you're doing with BIM Initiative. And it's about people sharing ideas and solve solutions so that architecture as a whole uses it where it's relevant to make decisions quicker.
Right. So for me, the first part is that we've got these incredible technologies. We've got a bunch of young people who decide to do architecture for any number of reasons. For me, architecture is still the finest profession. I'm biased. Okay?
It's a good profession. I'm biased as well, but I agree.
But what the biggest part about all these technologies, they enable us to make better decisions, informed decisions, because it's no longer just a a thing that's this size. It actually can be given quantities. But something that I think is really, really important, and this for younger people coming into the market, is I still have a piece of paper, and before somebody models something, I want them to draw it, where they have line weights to know what's cut, what's in projection. What is a waterproofing membrane? What is insulation? Where the cold bridge is? So they understand how these things are. Because to me, the architect was originally the master builder. He was the person who understood how these all got assembled. Now we're working in highly complex buildings. We're dealing with all these different properties, and Grenfell Tower becomes one of those things about some of the contractual issues and how we do things, and we do it badly. But one of those important parts of that, all those things we spoke about, the rendering, the visualization, etc., all is around physical properties. So like lighting levels, we need to understand that. I've done a rendering myself where I ended up with a little LED light, a single LED light, and it was brighter than the biggest searchlight from World War II in London, just because it had the wrong values. And if you could find that light, you've just found the source of energy. The eco guys will just be saying, wow, you've solved it. And this is the problem, is that we need to understand those properties. Those are part of our trade. And the tools of our trade is knowing how big, how long, how thick, how wide the physical properties. And I think that these enabling parts that we've got with BIM, various of the applications, the authoring applications, and that's the part, is we still have a problem with gluing them all together. This package won't talk to that one. This one does that. We've got open BIM. We've got a whole number of dynamics in our world. But there lies part of that energy, is that I use Revit and you use something else. I don't care, but let's find the way that we can actually glue these things together, that when I hand something to you, you can pick it up, and you may have to make some changes, but you know what changes to make. It's not smoke and mirrors. The more that we expose it to everybody, the whole industry is just going to benefit. And that comes back to what our early part of the discussion is. The more open we are with those discussions and agree to disagree, etc., and we don't have, a boxing session to resolve it, is rather go and buy another beer. A much easier way of resolving things. We can sit there and have a good chat.
I think that's a really good analogy for it. And I think that's the thing that what I learned is, because initially I almost felt many, many years ago that a BIM expert was entrenched in the software, and that's what it's all about. But actually what I've learned is about what you're talking about is solving problems, it's collaboration, it's working out things. And it's the same as I think in terms of a building where you rock up on site and you realize, holy moly, that's not what I expected to be there. And it can be like that in BIM of like, oh my days, we're inheriting this model, or okay, we've got to issue it this way for this client, or you got all these crazy things going on. And to me, it's not about it being perfect. I think like a really good team member is someone that basically deals with problems and helps people out and overcomes obstacles. And what we're talking about with BIM, and what I like about this whole topic is where you're talking about BIM is, yes, you're advocating BIM, but what you're doing is you're advocating in the way of how it applies to an actual building, how it can solve problems, how people now can review and make design decisions, because, and I think you agree with me, that BIM is a fantastic tool. It's not the end all. You need an architect to have decisions to put in. You need people to have agendas. You need to do it. But it is the fantastic way. It's a fantastic methodology. Sorry, I should say that Revit's a tool. BIM's a methodology to go about amazing architectural practice. And this is my opinion. But it's about getting to the crux of it. The whole concept of what you're talking about is how you can help people build projects better, less stressful, because actually a really optimized BIM model, a really optimized project that is seamless because BIM's help things out, the model's done really well, it informs people, the quality of the team, so people in terms of working there, they're working less hours, they're dealing with less problems are picked up earlier on. And I love the analogy that we've used today on this podcast, this episode, of talking about design teams, because I think it's a really good example because it's not normally thought of. Like, I think people think of BIM as a work in progress, but architectural visualization as the end result when you're selling a building. And what you're talking about is visualization to visualize the current BIM model. Now, we're not talking about the super graphics. What I liked about the images that you posted and we retweeted, though, is that they were darn good considering the time involved. And I love exploring that concept you're on about now of ratio to time versus results. And now it's because of the hardware where it's at, because of the gaming industry taking off and being massively profitable, means that actually we're in a really good position where we have, in my opinion, and you tell me what you think as well, but like we have hardware available that can generate these images quickly to make these decisions, which can support the methodologies, which, like you said, BIM's been around since 1994. It's not like it's been, Revit 2014. It's been around for years. We're now in a way where it's articulating it.
Right. So one of the first things we've spoken about the architect and the engineers and the team that we put together. There's one person that we've actually just left out of the picture a little bit.
Uh-oh, who's that?
And that's the contractor.
Okay, sorry, contractor.
Now, the problem behind this, or the opportunity that exists here, we currently spend, and I don't like the term design build, just because that's part of my background. And design build was something, and the term novation when I arrived here was it just threw me. I said, no, but that's somebody got two caps, and they might not know which one they're actually wearing at the time. But principally, one of the things is early engagement of the contractor while doing the detailing could actually markedly reduce the amount of time and the rework that takes place of submitting a design and then the contractor unpicks it to make value engineering.
Right.
Now, but what this does, and it would make so much more sense to engage that contractor, and he says, listen, I wouldn't do it like that. I'd do it like this. But what you've done is you've prepared something which gives you a performance, and you've opened the discussion. And if you do that before you finish the detailing, then you're only doing it once. So that engagement, I think, typifies that the whole project team, actually including the person who's going to be delivering it, definitely benefit. But the additional speed that this computer now gives us, it's actually more like the renderings, and you said how quick that visualization was put together, is the particular approach on Revit and SketchUp that I was using there, is that Enscape is common to both those packages. So I can go to SketchUp and I can go to Revit, and I should be able to produce the same or very similar results by using the same rendering engine. Right. So what I've done in my practice is now to have materials in SketchUp, which are not the same as materials in Revit. The one benefit we have in Revit is all the physical properties that go in there. Means that we can see that the physical properties that the engineer, the mechanical engineer, whoever would need, we don't get those with SketchUp. But by having a common library of images means that the renderings actually look very similar from two models using the same image base. So that part means I can do concept in SketchUp or format, but then it doesn't work with, and that's once again another dynamic of not having Enscape in it. But what it does is we get the ability to very quickly generate those views and initiate discussion. Even with the QS. So the QS comes along and says, I wouldn't go and put Portland stone in, it's just too expensive. But you've said to the client, look at what it looks like. And now you've opened that discussion so you can start throwing these things up. Yeah. Just make sure you're not standing under the block as it comes down, of course. But
let's get I love that. Let's get the Portland stone in. I want that conversation. I absolutely love it. And I think this has been a really interesting conversation in that way. What I think, though, is because you've seen so many things over the years, and what I'm conscious of is that now we've been talking for an hour, and what I think, no, that's not a negative. That's me saying, like, I could talk to you for hours. I'm just thinking maybe what would be awesome, and it depends how you feel about it, Pierre. I'm springing this on you on the spot, but maybe what we can do is return and have a chat, maybe in a month or two, whenever we feel that you got something you want to discuss. Because actually, I think what today has been a really good conversation in terms of an introduction to BIM, and our chat has organically talked about making decisions in architectural practice, and I've been gushing upon the kind of the stuff that I've talked about years ago, and it's really interesting to get an industry expert like yourself who's kind of on board. So perhaps what we can do is return and have a little chat. We can have a little glass of wine on the Friday night like we are doing now, and we can set the worlds to right. In the interim,
before or after COVID.
Oh, okay. Well, let's have a lot of conversations during COVID, because I don't think this situation is going to end soon, and we can keep catching up. Well, if anyone has not met you so far, Pierre, where can we find you? You're on LinkedIn. You're on the Architecture Social. Do you want to let us know where you're at? Your websites?
Yeah. So get hold of me on any of those. I'm engaged in Arc Smarter, which is also on the same platform that you guys are on.
The Mighty Networks, yeah. So you're on there.
And in the benefit of that is that all of it is opening up and engaging whoever wants to ask a question. But we typically just don't have enough time for all of these things. So, make contact on LinkedIn or whatever. Come with a question. There definitely will come out, how do we resolve things? How do we approach it? Because if you're a young person coming out into the market now, it's like going surfing in storm surf. It's very difficult to try and find your way around. And when you go down that wave, there's no stopping.
I love that.
You're on a new wave.
It's true. It is completely new. It's new for me. It's new for you. And that's why we were talking a little bit before this, because it is, and I hate the term unprecedented times. Forget that. We're not going to say that, but it's completely, I find it's very difficult for some people. And, I find it in certain ways, it's very stressful right now. I know a lot of people do. No one is alone right now, and that's the whole point. That's why I've enjoyed our conversation. It's nice to talk about these things, because we will get there. Of course we will all get there, and it's a really good time to learn. It's a really good time to build connections. It's a really good time to so I talk about it briefly. The Architecture Social, it was something that I set up on furlough, Pierre, because I wanted to initially talk with students about how to get a job, and it's kind of taken a life on its own. And I really think that that's why I'm so grateful that we can talk now, and there's a few other vehicles to do it. ArcSmarter, fantastic community to talk about BIM. I've been on there. Anyone that's currently doing BIM asks a question, that is the place to go for. I mean, the Architecture Social, I do my own little thing. Like, we joke about it and not joke about it. Like, I'm having a glass of wine right now. We're having a bit of fun. You're having like a coffee or what have you. Yeah, next time we're going to have a glass of wine. I'll let you know beforehand.
It might be fortified. It might be a little bit fortified. All the right spirit.
It's Friday evening, guys, so I don't want to hear any of it. It's been a tough week and it's a stressful time. But that's the point. We all do our different things. There's loads of different ways. And LinkedIn, yes, it serves a complete purpose. I'm on LinkedIn. Really, really powerful. But if you want a community aspect, ArcSmart sounds really good for BIM. I've been on that. I think that's great. And anyone is welcome on the Architecture Social in terms of just, if you're involved in architecture, and who knows, right? But yeah, with the brief changes in the day-to-day, we can talk about anything. You can talk about BIM. You can talk about anything. You can find us there. Let's talk about briefly before we end. Let's talk about the BIM initiative. I think it'd be really good to share it with people if you want to give a description of what you've been up to. Right.
So I've had a number of jobs that we've gone through in the time that I've been in the UK since I returned from the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And it's been very interesting. Eventually got to a point where, because of doing contract work, I found that it was necessary to establish a company. So I did the traditional thing, put the name in there, and it was far too staid. And it's been something that's germinated. So it got to a point where now BIM initiative is exactly that. I think it's that the term BIM, everybody's starting to say, well, maybe we need to get rid of BIM. It's a term that's too similar to Revit. It's too analogous to Revit. And we should change it. But if we're just changing for change's sake, the problem is that we put ourselves in a real quandary. On the other side, initiative is the part that I think we have so many opportunities for initiative, and we're seeing that. I think some of the engagements we're seeing are enormous. So I've been engaged. There's been some pretty much an indecent amount of drying up of work, people putting things on hold. It's a direct product of the market. But on the other hand, we've had a couple of really interesting ones. The media that you saw is a company in South Africa that does wine cellars, bespoke wine cellars. And it's not just doing the renderings for them, but in fact, we're looking at the process behind documentation, because they actually do bespoke furniture. And somebody gets on a website, places an order, and we're looking at the process of how do we get from clicking on that, almost like IKEA, push on it and buying a shopping list, the cutting list, the finishes list, pricing, all these things, all within using BIM and the process. And it means that people can then look at what they're getting. But what's been the enabler is the development of that process. On the other hand, I've got a friend who is currently in South Africa. He lives in the Maldives. He's a quantity surveyor. Went to school together. That was so long ago that in South Africa they talk about the rinderpest. So that's it. It was that long ago that the rinderpest was there. There was a period of illness in the country. But what happens is that Mark is there. His wife is down in St. Francis Bay. They've got a house. I took the headset, and between Mark, myself, and a model that I'd made up of the existing residents, we went through and looked at the potential for the changes. And that was a great test bed to see how this works over those time zones. And so I think that and the engagements I've had with people right now, particularly some guys involved in doing conservation work. And I strongly believe that, the little thing of the tablet, how our world is going to change by bringing digital to the construction site and all of the phases up to that. That's where I'm engaging with people now about that. Also on the same thing, I'm busy looking at doing Dynamo courses for some clients. So that's preparation for that. And the Dynamo is simply, it's another enabler. There are guys out there who I'll stand back and say are absolutely brilliant. And I'll use Gavin Crump, Aussie BIM guru. Gavin is absolutely brilliant. And what it is that we need to draw on those strengths of those people, because they have a better capacity than some of us do for doing certain things. I can move the 4-inch paintbrush around. Notice 4-inch, not 100 millimeters. But the part there is that collectively we have all of those things. So that's part of what I'm doing is in fact surrounding myself with people that have those additional capacities and can then push the kind of benefit that the client will get out of it, because we're putting the right people at the right place in the right time.
I love it. Look, Pierre, I've met you many, many years ago, and I've always, my opinion of you mentally is someone who's generous, someone that helps, and someone that's engaged in conversation, wants to constantly improve upon your own vision of BIM and impart wisdom on others. So look, I really thank you for this podcast. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've had a good little giggle too. It's me and you. It's basically me and you talking. I've loved it, and the nice thing is that we get to impart our wisdom on the world. Hello, Spotify. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. So, thank you, Pierre. So you have a lovely weekend, and we will speak soon. I really appreciate you so much.
As long as it's not cold tomorrow, then that's fine. Then
I cannot make that promise. Thank you, Pierre. Have a good evening.
Good one, Stephen. Thanks.